Videos vaunt Italian success. VDC vanquishers explain success and successive variants viewed. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, November 2023. For our feature story, any sport or hobby should want to bestow World Championship honors on a player every year, both as a way to award excellence as well as to provide competitive incentives. In the diplomacy hobby, we are lucky now to crown 3 different world champions every year, or at least every other year. World DipCon, or WDC, for face-to-face play, the Online Diplomacy Championship, or ODC, for online extended deadline play, and as of 2020, we now have the VDC, the Virtual Diplomacy Championship, which recognizes mastery of this new mode of play we invented during the pandemic, virtual face-to-face. We've had 3 VDCs now with 3 different champs. And of course, the 4th VDC is coming up in the very near future. So there's no better time to talk to these 3 world champions about what it takes to reach that peak level of performance. We'll do that later in this program. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. Let's start off with news from virtual face-to-face league play. One of the 2 English language virtual leagues, the Tour of Britain, just finished its last 2 rounds of competition on November 11th and 12th, played on the VWDC Discord server. Florida's Tim Crosby had been the reigning British monarch going into this season, having won the Tour of Britain in 2022. But that king is dead. Long live the new king. Bradley Grace of, surprisingly enough, Britain, is the new king. Bradley, the first of his name, rode big early season finishes into that final lap, not needing a great result from the last weekend of play to secure his victory after all. He also claimed right here on this very program a few episodes ago, when interviewed about his extended deadline event win in the first season of Olympus, that he had not yet achieved any real success in the virtual world. Can't say that no more, man. Congratulations also to Jason Bennett for his 2nd place and to Tim Crosby for scratching and clawing his way to 3rd place by virtue of a very strong last round finish. Kudos also to Gary Sturley for running yet another successful season of the Tour of Britain. Full results are linked below. In face-to-face news, the latest edition of the long-running diplomacy event at the Carnage Gaming Tournament in Vermont was held the last weekend of October, with California player Jason Massbaum taking top honors with a nice board top in his last round to seal the victory. His Austria at 9 centers, after taking a few dots from his Russian ally, propelled him to a substantial lead over 2nd-place finisher David Miller of Maryland, whose Germany in that same game suffered a 2-center loss, the same turn that Jason got his 2-center gain. 3rd place of the tournament went to now tournament veteran Ed Sullivan, further cementing Ed's strong position going into the final legs of the DBN Invitational points race. Speaking of the DBNI, there are only a few opportunities left for players to acquire DBNI points for that February 2024 virtual tournament, something that we on DBN call Diplomacy's Big Dance. You can watch the full video coverage of Carnage from DBN at the link provided below. We've also put a link to the current DBNI standings so that you can see how that race is shaping up for placement in the field of 28. Now let's go to news from the world of diplomacy variants. In the latest edition of Diplomacy World, issue 163, variant enthusiast and North Carolinian Alex Runke wrote an article about variants which feature what is called the diplomatic points scoring system, or diplomatic point system, or DP. DP variants contain not only the major powers controlled by one of the players in the game, but also minor powers, the control of which is bid upon as part of order submission. There are a number of such variants, with several being outlined to a significant degree within Alex's piece, which begins on page 30 of the Diplomacy zine I have linked below. Alex also announced that he is once again running in an online variant tournament called the Tournament Through Time, which will begin in early January 2024. This will involve players trying their hands at 4 different DP-style variants throughout the year, including Sub-Saharan, Succession and Legacy, Order of the Dragon, and Saga of the Nine. Hey, all you variant folk out there who say there's not enough tournaments for you, you're right. Which means you need to join the Discord server linked below and sign up to compete in the tournament through time. Speaking of North Carolina, i.e. the clear epicenter of the world of diplomacy, face-to-face action has returned to this area after many years' absence for club play. Under the capable leadership of Keith Worstel and John Dargis, we now have one game day for the Carolina Amateur Diplomats back on November 4th, with another scheduled for December the 9th. If you are located within the state or could be in the area on December 9th, please join the VWDC Discord server linked below and navigate your way to the North Carolina Roll to participate in the planning for that December 9 and future game days. You can also send an email to ncdiplomacy@gmail.com to get on their email contact list. Now, what happened on that game on November 4th, you ask? I don't have the full results, but I'm reasonably sure that Jack Craig played better than Jack's dad, Todd Craig, because that's the way I would have reported it regardless of what actually happened. It's my show, folks. As longtime viewers will know, Deadline tries to keep you informed of how scholars are using diplomacy at universities around the world as a means to explore various academic topics. We've always, before though, seen the use of classic diplomacy or maybe gunboat in academic papers. But a recent master's thesis from Thomas Lokeberg of the Department of Computer Science at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology takes things a step further by analyzing the possibility of machine learning using variants, which are different maps entirely from the classic game. Lokeberg tested 3 different map variants as part of his master's thesis, which advances the state of the art for AI agents playing games under the basic rules of diplomacy. He also includes a nice retrospective of past AI research involving diplomacy, something I followed quite easily, I'll have you know, and then included a number of mathematical formulas of which I could make neither heads nor tails. For the bravest among you out there in diplomacy land, I offer you the chance to use the link below to read the entire paper, both in English and in Norwegian. See the link below. Now, let's take a trip around the world of YouTube channels and other diplomacy content creators to report to you on the latest and greatest new diplomacy products from whom we call our DBN media partners. The fine folks at the legendary Tactics channel on YouTube have just released another of their outstanding series of videos about our game. This one focused on a particular strategy for the play of Italy. Host Randy Thompson and his interview subject discuss the Italy-Turkey alliance, which they call the SPA or Southern Power Alliance, and why it should be more a frequent occurrence. Also on YouTube, Brother Board has created 2 new videos for your viewing enjoyment. One on the topic of negotiation theory, and another, interestingly enough, about the various concerns one should take into account when playing, yes, Italy also. Leaving the video world and entering the world of print media, the Diplomacy Briefing newsletter now has a series of articles appearing weekly about unorthodox openings in diplomacy, with the November 10th edition featuring a crackpot opening from a crackpot theorist. It's a farce, and he tries to justify it with incomprehensible blatherings. You can find links to all 3 of these diplomacy media below in the show notes. Now, let's check in on the world of diplomacy zines. Longtime UK hobbyist Stephen Agar just released issue 10 of his traditional diplomacy zine called God Save the Zine. In addition to game reports for the regular and variant diplomacy games he's running for his subscribers, Stephen also stuffed this issue full of other fun content, including a lively letter column, history articles about the UK convention scene, and the full rules and map for the variant called Hoplite Wars, which allows a player to control a major power, a minor power, and an overseas colony over a map of the ancient Mediterranean world. There are also strategy articles regarding the play of Bourse and of the two-player variant Intimate Diplomacy. All in all, this is a zine which the hobby of old would have found outstanding, and the hobby now can too, including you. The zine is linked below. Also recently released was the latest edition of Tom Howell's zine called Back of the Envelope. His issue 28, published from Washington State, features the play of many games in addition to diplomacy, including Railway Rivals, Dominion, Breaking Away, and others. And he also includes hobby news and a very lively letter column as well. Tom has openings in several games right now. You can contact him about adding you to his subscriber list using the following email address: off-the-shelf@olympus.net. Registration is open now for the 2024 North American Diplomacy Championships, DIPCON 53, to be held in Surrey, near Vancouver, British Columbia, in conjunction with the Cascadia Diplomacy Tournament. Longtime Cascadia Tournament Director Chris Brand is planning for 3 rounds of diplomacy over 3 days, using the ManorCon scoring system, with games called at the end of 1909 if no other result is achieved before then. This 2024 event will be the 3rd time DIPCON has been held in Canada, with the latest one being the 2007 tournament, also held in Vancouver, in conjunction with that year's World DIPCON. That one was won by Doug Moore. Perhaps you can join Doug as a DIPCON winner. Sign up now for the 53rd running of this hobby institution using the registration information linked below. Now, just a program note, the 2023 Euro DIPCON is being played in Paris right about when you're listening to this episode. So we'll report on the results of that tournament in the December edition of Deadline. And now it's time for a segment of our show we call My Favorite Things. In this segment, we talk to a leading member of the hobby about some interest or pastime which is meaningful to him or her, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we talked to veteran face-to-face player Tim Richardson of Virginia about his pastime of negotiation over diplomacy board and his profession of negotiation in the halls of Congress as a lobbyist. Hello, Tim. Welcome to Deadline.
David, hello. It's good to see you. And hello, all my fellow hobbyists.
Absolutely. You and I first met at a diplomacy event way back in the mid-90s, I think. Tell us about your history with the game, if you would.
Sure. Yes, we met at PresCon in Charlottesville in '98. I think you had overheard Steve Morris and I doing our Rocky and Bullwinkle routine for about the millionth time. He just knocked on our door and said, let's go find something to eat. It was 10 o'clock in Charlottesville, Virginia, which meant that it was Cracker Barrel. That was about the only option back then. So my first face-to-face tournament was actually AvalonCon in 1997. I took Best Italy in that tournament, as you guys can see. Still have it, had to take it down from my wall. I had learned diplomacy in sometime in the 90s. Our role-playing group was short a key character. So the GM said, hey, I'll teach you guys how to play diplomacy. I was immediately obsessed. So we had once a month at least to play diplomacy instead of our regular role-playing session, because I couldn't get enough of it. I took it to college with me when I went. We had, by the end of my sophomore year, we had about a good dozen hardcore players. We loved the variants. We had invested and had a giant Youngstown 2 map because everybody loved an army sitting on a fleet for at least a turn. So that was a great deal of fun. When I graduated and I came to the DC area, I started a website in the middle of 96 called The Old Republic, just because I didn't like the judges. I wanted, like PBM, I wanted someone to be adjudicating it. So I did that. I recruited 4 or 5 folks that I knew from school and from back home, and then just had to go online, see if anybody was willing to play in that format. I found 2 individuals whose names you might recognize, Chris Martin and Smacko McMillie. So they were on the very first game hosted by my website. We had such a great time that Smacko invited everybody over to his house for a face-to-face game. So my buddies from Pennsylvania drove down. Chris took the train from New York City, and we showed up at Smacko's and we had a blast. It was just so much fun. As a result of that, I started looking for a local group. I'd seen we had the CADs and some other groups, so I went out on the Diplomatic Pouch, where I
Oh,
was
yeah.
a volunteer writer,
Yep.
and found a couple of locally hosted games. Went to my first one, and again, some names you'll recognize: Steve Morris, Ike Porter, um, a couple others who were there in that first game. And I don't know, we played once a month, and then sometime in the beginning of '98, we started a little group that you might have heard of called the Potomac Tea and Knife Society.
Oh, yes.
Which Morris came up with the name for that, and I bastardized it to the Pit Kissers. We were very active. We played every month almost without fail for years. We hosted our first tournament in 1999. We hosted the Worlds in 2005 and 2018. So it was just a great time. I was really obsessed with the game because I liked that it was the only chance in diplomacy is what power you're going to pick out of the hat. Probably not this one. And the players that are seated there. Everything else, you kind of create your own destiny, and that really appealed to me. You start out with Risk and Axis and Allies, Tactics 2, a couple of computer games I played all the time, Computer Ambush and Conquest of Europe on a Commodore 64. But there's still an element of chance there. You just don't see the dice rolling.
Right.
So I was immediately obsessed by diplomacy and played it every chance I got when I was a much younger man.
I was going to say the Pit Kissers are a really important part of hobby history. It's sort of died down a little bit now in the DC area,
Mm-hmm.
but there was a time that the Pit Kissers were really the backbone of the entire hobby, I would say.
We had, on average at our height, I bet more than 30 regular players that were in and out. And as a result of, all those face-to-face games, people became excited. We pulled, we were doing what Discord is doing now. We were pulling online players into the face-to-face realm.
Yes.
And we would routinely take a dozen or more players to DixieCon, to PresCon, to these face-to-face tournaments, because that's the way I think the game was meant to be played. And for me, that's the best way to enjoy it.
Well, and Tempest itself, which was the Pit Kissers event, you've already mentioned the fact that it hosted championship level events a couple of times, but was also just a well-attended, well-run event for basically decades.
Right. Yeah. We had Andy was tournament director for a long time. Chris Martin and Pete Jurgen ran the 2018 WDC, which was, I think probably in the top 3 or 4 in terms of attendance. And we've had good people who are willing to put in the work and run a good event.
It's really true. Well, you've already mentioned that you play other games, and you mentioned that diplomacy is different from those games in the sense that there's no luck other than the power selection. Is there anything else that you think diplomacy is unique in the gaming world? And since you play so many other board games, you think it's unique in other ways?
I do, and it's because of the individual players. You need another person playing a power that, while there are limitations based on the geography of the map, the dots, and the kind of units you have, everything else is on the table. You probably played some of these weird games too. The guy who actually taught me, he would routinely clean our clocks all the time. And one time he drew France, and he said, before the draw, he said, if I draw France, I'm winning. He picked France out of the hat, slammed it down. That's the first time I've ever seen people get out of the way so Austria could try to invade Burgundy. You can really just create whatever kind of madness you like. And that's, as I said, when it comes to randomness, it's the 6 other people at that table.
Do you have a particular opening or a particular alliance you'd like to talk about here in the interview?
When I first started playing a lot regularly, I really enjoyed Russia and liked the opening move. I like to get to send that Moscow unit north and hope that, the traditional Turkish alliance gave me some breathing room to get a jump in Scandinavia. Nowadays, my favorite power is Italy. I really like aligning with Austria, doing a blue water Lepanto. And whenever I can, my favorite alliance, no matter what power I am, but I prefer the Italian, is EGI. You get an army in Piedmont and Burgundy and a fleet in the English Channel, and France is going to have a hard day.
Well, that is very true. All right. So this particular segment which we call my favorite things. It's about people talking about something in their lives other than diplomacy. So tell us a little bit about what you do for a living.
Sure. I am the senior legislative liaison for the National Fraternal Order of Police. In DC, they lengthen your title rather than add to your paycheck, which is why that's such a mouthful. It's just a fancy way of saying I'm a lobbyist. I work with the administration and mostly with Congress. My role is mostly congressional to push legislations, regulations, policies, and others, and also public relations to a certain extent that benefits our 370 some thousand members. About a little over 1/3 of all law enforcement officers in the United States are members of the FOP.
How did you get into that field, the lobbying field?
Mhm. Well, I studied political science and English professional writing. I was dual majored in Elizabethtown College. I had an internship opportunity. About 6 months after graduation from school, and they were advertising for an internship. So I went down there and I did a 6-month internship for a senator, and then it was just serendipitous. I saw literally on a what do you call those poster boards down in the basement of one of the Senate office buildings. They were looking for a legislative assistant for the Fraternal Order of Police. Now, the state lodge president of the New Jersey Lodge was a detective that worked for my father. My dad was chief of detectives at that time. So I applied. I had a job lined up with the RNC, and then this opportunity. So they interviewed me and hired me a day later. Now, that detective that was the state lodge president had just run against and lost the national president who hired me. So I'm not sure if that connection helped or hurt at that moment. But I accepted the job. That's June of '96. So Clinton was running for his second term. That's how I keep track of time, what
Yes.
Congress it is and what administration it is.
Yep.
And at the end of that Congress, the boss said, "So what do you think? What are your plans? Where do you see yourself?" As all employers do. And I said, "I'm going to stay one Congress. I'm going to learn everything I can from you." And then I said, then I'll probably be looking on. And as I mentioned, that was 1996, and I'm still there. So
either you never got around to it, or something, which is possible in your case, or something just happened. Well, describe a typical day for you in your job. What does it look like?
Sure. Well, now with the technology and the monitoring software, it's a little easier. You got to catch up on your news, your political news, and you're inside the Beltway nonsense if you don't live in that environment. But also, what bills were introduced last night, or what hearings have been noticed. Committees will send out formal notices next week or on Thursday. We're going to be marking up this legislation. I closely monitor, obviously, the Judiciary Committee, Homeland Security committees in both chambers, House and Senate. Tons of email, which it's unfortunately right now we're at a point where it's probably about 70% reactive and about 30% proactive, calling and prodding members of Congress to do something. A lot of what I'm doing now on a daily basis is working with administration officials. President Biden issued an executive order on policing last year, and we're implementing that, what he wants and what the order says. We're trying to make sure that it's going to do what all of us want, which is improve law enforcement in the United States. I think I also, every week, I try and call 3 or 4 people that I don't need anything from, just to check in. I always think of it as, I'm the 12 center power, but I'll go chat with the guy with 1 dot, just because you're going to play him again at some point. If not in this game, then later. So same thing. If I'm the one center guy who's surrounded, I'll go and talk to the board leader, just because you want to know what they're thinking in that particular spot. So it's something. There's a lot of parallels I see in playing a game of dip and doing what I do in terms of legislative advocacy, because it's relationship, it's people.
Yeah, I was going to ask you obviously there's communication skills involved in both things, diplomacy and your job. So do you think there is some overlap there in terms of how you communicate or in what format you communicate or anything else?
Sure. Communication is absolutely key, and it's similar because usually those conversations, I'm trying to convince someone to do something, which is parallel to what we do in the game of diplomacy. It's convincing Germany to open to Burgundy, or convincing a representative from Pennsylvania to support a bill to reform Social Security, to increase spending to fight the fentanyl crisis. It's like playing a game of diplomacy with no win parameters whatsoever with 435 different people.
Well,
And some of them you talk
sounds
to.
like a piece of cake. Sounds like a piece of cake.
It used to be easier, but there's a lot of moving parts. But obviously, some members need a lot of maintenance, need a lot of handholding. Some offices do the right thing, whether I talk to them or not, and some you've got to battle, you've got to block. It's not always it's always collegial, but it sometimes can get combative, as I'm sure anyone who's turned on the news for 5 or 6 minutes has seen.
Of course. Yes. Well, we all think we know something about what lobbyists do, which means we probably don't know very much. But tell us something you think we would find surprising about your job.
I think just how long it takes to do anything. It's a good idea. It probably takes 10 or 12 years to get done. A really dumb, bad idea, it's 2 weeks. It all depends on politics. Is kind of like the stock market. Truth doesn't really matter. It's the perception. It's the sense of urgency. A lot of what I try to do in working with those offices is, again, just like on a diplomacy board. What do you define as success? What does a successful result look like for you, Mr. Congressperson? Once you figure that out, you've got a roadmap of how you proceed. What's frustrating is it's much more common now. And again, if you turn on the news, you can see this. They don't know what success looks like. They don't know what constitutes a win for them because they don't have anything to build on. They're trying to win the moment. They're trying to get the clicks. So that's a super frustrating part of the job. It's, again, linking it back to the game. It's that person who is mad at Bill for some reason. So he's just going to try and make Bill have a miserable game and not play to his or her own.
Let's be honest. We all get mad at Bill Hackenbrack a lot. I assume that's who you're talking about. We all get mad at him on a fairly regular basis. So that really doesn't tell us very much.
That's right. And there are always your standard your standard strategies on the board and in my work. Stay away from that Coburn fella. And no, we can't work with that member of Congress. He's just not someone that we can work with or stand behind or even be in a press release with. So a lot of similar.
Many of us out that are not in your world would love for the political world to be less combative, I think. What is your view about that?
David, I'm not optimistic. And I went through the Clinton impeachment as well. The climate on Capitol Hill and in our national politics, this is the most toxic, dysfunctional, and hostile environment in history. Well, at least in my history. That's 14 Congresses, 5 administrations. It's nasty. It's personal. Ego, social media, the clicks, which I referenced before, that's driving policy. Well, that's driving decision making. You can't even really call it policy because it's so schizophrenic. There's almost zero trust. Cross aisle friendships are virtually unheard of now, unless those guys have been around for a long time. Someone's been there, 10 years or less. They're not going to know anybody outside their little circle. Even within the state delegations themselves, they're in their little partisan camps. Relationships are very transactional. I mean, think if you're playing a diplomacy game and you can't mention anything else except the orders. You can't ask about the family. And so, what did you think of the latest Marvel film? There's no getting to know one another. There's no personal stake in any outcome. It's nothing like I've ever seen before. It's really, really a frustrating and sad environment to work in nowadays.
When did that start to change, if you know? I mean, you're saying it didn't used to be this way when you started. So tell us,
Yeah.
I mean, how far back are we talking about really? 10 years? Um,
I think, and this is my personal theory, hasn't been vetted or researched or tested or anything. But in 1995, with the one of the provisions of the contract with America was really cracking down on spending, and one of the highest profile targets of that were what they call CODELs, or congressional delegations. It's where you went on fact-finding missions. What happened on those CODELs is staff and members alike got to know one another as people. They had, joint events, dinners, lunches. They rode the plane, train, or automobiles there together. They talked to one another, got to know one another. Um, when they shut that off and the gift ban, that I get it. I'm defending taxpayers' money funding trips and gifts and so forth, but it changed the culture, and that was the first domino, I think, that transformed it into persons with a common interest, with that trusted one another, that were invested in the success of their efforts and in the institution. I think that's when it began to change. And then, of course, you had the hyper partisanship that started with the impeachment of President Clinton, and things just kind of spiraled out there. As with everything else, too, the influence of social media has not been net positive. Um, and then, for both parties, really, tearing down, which is easier than building
of
anything,
course, yes.
became popular. It became something you wanted to do. I mean, look at some of the candidates running for office now. They're talking about slitting throats and and ripping down institutions. And even if that is your policy objective, that's not the way to speak about it. That's the wrong rhetoric to achieve something, because if you want to dismantle the Department of Education, and I'm on board for that conversation, but you're not talking about tearing this down or tearing this up or shutting things down. You're talking about why you want to shut down the Department of Education, because we believe it will benefit our children more if states are running that and you don't have this federal bureaucracy. That's the way to converse about this stuff. And they don't anymore. It doesn't fit in the 136 characters or whatever, X or Twitter. I'm not on any of those platforms. Whatever they are, it's coarsened our rhetoric, and to our detriment, and to the detriment of institutions like the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Well, that's sort of undeniable. I was just thinking about the diplomacy hobby, which is full of people from different backgrounds, different political perspectives, different religious traditions, different personalities, different generations. In the past, there have been times, frankly, a little bit before my time and in my early days in the hobby, when it was pretty combative. Political stuff got talked about a lot. People got their feelings hurt a lot. It really doesn't happen that much anymore. It's almost like things have gone the other way around for the diplomacy hobby, which is much more of a sort of a big happy family type situation. Do you think there's any hope we get to there from in the world outside of diplomacy?
Not until people start talking to one another like people again, instead of a monolithic movement, or just a group. It's easy to demonize or to lionize a group, because it doesn't have any individual flaws or individual characteristics that make it unique. It's just a group, whatever it is. It can be referred to in very generalistic language, which makes it easy, as I said, to demonize or to lionize it. Oh, this thing is the best ever. Whatever these guys say, I believe, and I will give them money and knock on doors for them. Or these guys are un-American. We need to kick them out of kick them out of our society and marginalize them. Until we get past that, until we figure out a way to get back to relationships, I think it'll be very tough. And one of the challenges to overcome that too, and this is the result of technological advances, social media, which I also asked, but particularly during COVID, I like to play diplomacy face to face. I like to lobby face to face. I like to go into your office or meet for coffee, or have that personal interaction, so that you can do what I said about the Codels. Ask about their family, learn where they went to school. How long have you been up on the Hill? Personal things that I'll file away for the next time that we're working with them. That, especially during COVID, was impossible. And until the new majority took over, you could not get into that Capitol complex. Even after it reopened, it was a pain in the neck. Very similar to the early months after 9/11, when obviously you had to change a lot of security protocols. It's put more distance and more obstacles between a professional like me and the member of Congress or their key staff. So I can't even imagine how difficult it would be for a constituent to reach their member of Congress. And again, get that non-transactional personal relationship with the staff or the member. So those things have all filtered in too, to keeping people apart. Now, when the Capitol reopened in truth in January, I was on the Hill 3 days a week, just reintroducing myself to folks that I hadn't seen in 2 years, and introducing my folks to that I only knew in a video box on front of my screen. The wildest thing about that is the height changes. There's 2 members of Mr. Schumer's staff that I always saw in a setting like this. And when I met them in person, the young lady was like 6'5", and the fellow I worked with, he was about maybe 5 feet, and it was just very startling when you see somebody just from the shoulders up. So that's just a humorous anecdote from those face-to-face meetings. But I still try to get out there and be personal and build those relationships, and that's helped me both in the career and in my time as a member of the hobby.
Well, to bring it back to diplomacy for a minute, those kinds of surprises happen all the time, or certainly in the past happened all the time, when you knew somebody from playing with them electronically or doing something like this, virtual play, and then you go meet them in person and like, man, I didn't realize you looked exactly like that. And of course, establishing those relationships at a face-to-face event, there's no substitute for that, is there?
No, I don't think so. It's, again, even during the COVID times, I really only played some of the major tournaments. I was cutting edge, man, in 1998 when it came to technology, but I still am. But it's no longer 1998.
He was not. In 1998. No, he wasn't. All right, Tim, I'm sorry. Were you saying something?
But it's I still prefer to play face to face. I wish our local hobby was a little bit more active, but it's COVID put a lot of that to bed, and it's easier on even the younger folks to just hop online in their pajamas and play the game over Discord, and certainly probably for some of the older folks who it takes a little bit more time to get where you're going some mornings. So. But it is the best way to play the game.
I think there's some hope that things will resurrect in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area. There's some people that want to do things. There's obviously a lot of players in that market.
Yes. Yep. I'll share another humorous anecdote. I went in to see, just really on a fly, one of my Senate contacts has said, you really got to meet this new staff counselor. They're going to run nominations, and there are a couple of ones that we want to check with you, judges, with views that might concern you. And again, I went to his office and we're chit-chatting and so forth. And he was at UNC Chapel Hill, at least for something. And I mentioned that, I'm down there once a year without fail. And he's like, oh, why? I was like, well, I play this board game called Diplomacy, full stop. He said, you play Diplomacy? I've never met a Diplomacy player in the wild before. So, yeah, in the wild. That's
in the wild.
The exact time. He had played in college and continued to play online with the same 7 or 8 guys. So I said, well, next time we get a face-to-face, you're coming.
That's absolutely. Yeah. All right, Tim, I'm going to give you a chance here to give us your final thoughts. It can be about the world of politics that we've been talking about, or the world of diplomacy, or both.
Well, I don't want to end on a downer. Maybe things will get better, but I just like to tell all the players that I cross swords with just what a good time I've always had on a board. I've had bad results, but I've never had a bad time. I told my kids when I was coaching them in sports, the objective of competition is to win. The point is to have fun. I have almost never not had fun with 6 of my best friends or worst enemies at a board game. So to everybody who's tuned in to see me in my Phillies cap that I've played with, thank you. David, for folks like you that step up and keep carrying this hobby forward on your backs, we appreciate your efforts too. And I guess I'll leave it at that. The objective is to win, but the point is to have fun. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that is a great way to end this segment. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Sure. Thank you, David.
And now for our feature presentation. This season's Virtual Diplomacy Championship is right around the corner. Details to be announced soon on the VWDC Discord server. It'll be a date either in December or in January. To tide us over until then, let's have a lively discussion with the 3 past winners of that event. We'll get insights on what the VDC is like, why it matters, and how to win the bloody thing. We welcome to the show 2020 winner Morgante Pell of Vermont, Quebec's Nicolas Sahuguet, the 2021 champ, and Vancouver, British Columbia's Riaz Virani, the VDC winner from last December 2022. Well, hey there, virtual champs, and welcome to Deadline. Let's start with a little backstory on each of you. Riaz, let's start with you. When did you start playing diplomacy and why?
I started playing as a university student. I was looking for a board game that was more than just rolling dice, and I really enjoyed it. Took some time off with family, came back, and it's rekindled my love for the game.
Well, we're glad. Let's see, Morgante, how about you?
Sure. I played a few times in college with some friends who just like playing board games. I don't think we ever finished a game or even made it past 1903. But then really got back into the game during the pandemic when I was stuck in lockdown and wanted something to entertain myself online.
Well, a lot of people had that story. The pandemic really added a lot of folks to our hobby, to our more active hobby. Nikolai, you are not one of them, so tell us your story that goes further back to that, please.
I knew about the game when I was a kid. I owned a version of the board game, but I never really played. Then I played a few games in college, and according to the World Diplomacy Database, I even played one tournament game in the early 90s. I completely forgot about it until WDD told me about it. And then basically I started playing a bit seriously online around 2001. And then the people I met online told me that they were a face-to-face tournament, and I started playing a couple of face-to-face tournaments in Europe, and I kind of kept playing since then.
Well, and now we've got virtual play. Let's stay with you, Nicholas, because this virtual method of diplomacy has not been around very long. It just started during the pandemic, but has become pretty popular. How important do you think virtual face-to-face is to our hobby and as an overall question?
I think it's a very nice way to play the game because it has both some of the advantages of face-to-face. I mean, you talk to real people. You don't really see their eyes when you stab them and when they stab you, but still you have this kind of real life tension that you don't have when you just write emails. But at the same time, it's very accessible, so you can play from your own home a bit whenever you want. You don't have to pay for a plane ticket or for expensive hotel rooms. So I think it's you can meet people from all over the world, play with different people every time. So I think it's a very nice way to play the game. Maybe the perfect formula for tournament play in the virtual has not been found yet, but I think it's a very valid way to play the game, and I think it has a bright future.
Yeah, Riaz, speaking of the future, let's look just briefly in the past. The reason we have virtual is because of the COVID pandemic, really. It was invented, sort of a necessity being the mother of invention thing. And several tournaments, including my tournament, went to a virtual format because we couldn't meet. But now that those face-to-face tournaments are back being face-to-face, what do you think the raison d'etre is to continue with these standalone virtual tournaments like the VDC and the Summer Classic?
I think it's a nice way to distinguish from our face-to-face circuit, and it's a very important way to connect young people to the game, because for most people, you're not going to. It's very difficult to get 7 people together to play a game and to play it for multiple hours. But to do it virtually, it's a lot easier to find 7 people globally to be able to play the game. And to play it on a tournament basis. We all know that cost of living has gone up quite a bit. So this is a great way for people to learn the game, to play the game, and for those who have a busy life and are not able to travel, it's a great way for them to continue playing, continue keeping their skills fresh.
Yeah, that makes sense. Morgante, I first learned about you as a player during this virtual era, but of course, now you've been to face-to-face tournaments too. So if you don't mind, compare and contrast those two playing experiences for our audience.
Sure. I think before I did a face-to-face tournament, everyone said it's so different. In my experience, it's far more similar than I expected it to be. Most of my experience with virtual translated over. Even some of the relationships were the same. The conversations were the same. The biggest difference, I think, is probably in honestly just the length of some of the games and how much stamina plays a role, right? Because when you're at home and you're in your nice environment, it's very easy to, even during a virtual tournament, get a good night's sleep, have good rest, have good meals. Most tournaments don't operate that way. Most tournaments, people are out, having meals together, having lots of fun, but of course, not getting much sleep, wearing down, and really want to get away from the games much sooner. So I'd say the biggest thing that you should prepare for if you're thinking about your first face-to-face tournament is it's going to be a lot, right? You have to have the energy for it to get through a weekend and still be on your last game and have the motivation to actually follow through and keep going for that last stop to win.
Yeah, I've told people for years that it is a mental game. It's an emotional game. It's also in face-to-face version. It's a very physical game, which is not the same really in a virtual setting. All right, you won the very first Virtual Diplomacy Championship in 2020, Morgante. So if you don't mind, walk us through that tournament from your perspective, including the top board.
Sure. That tournament was, it was, like you said, the first one. I think it was like one of the first time that you had so many people competing in a really large tournament where you're not seeing the same people across multiple boards, where you were seeing a pretty, wide field. So the early games, one of the things I really liked is it actually wasn't really clear who was emerging as winners in the prep before the top board, right? There was lots of, play even up into the last rounds, right? And that was a tournament that had many rounds. I actually had no idea I was going to make the top board. I had a few good games, a few not so good games, and that was enough to bring me onto the top board in the earlier rounds. And then going to the top board, that was, I drew Turkey. So it's a country I wasn't that comfortable playing, actually. And then right off the bat had 2 enemies. I found out Austria and Russia both were not my fans, so very, very quickly. Thought that was the end for me for the game, but found one good ally in Italy and stuck with it long enough that fortunes changed, dynamics changed, and had a good ally who was willing to say, if it's not going to be me, because he had so many people attacking him, he was happy to see me win and support me through that.
Hey, that's a tried and true way to win a tournament. It really is. Nikolai, how about you to walk us through the 2021 event, please?
So, for me, I've been playing for a while, so I think motivation is what really I need to play a good tournament. And so in 2021, the first few games were not that great, but I was kind of still very motivated. It was during the pandemic. And my addiction to playing diplomacy was back. So I kept fighting and managed to qualify for the top board in the last, basically the last year of the last board. And so, yeah, I was very motivated. So I was part of the top board that Morgante just described. And it just beat me at the end by a little bit. And I was still, fuming a little bit not to have won the past year. So think on the top board, I was highly motivated to try to do my best. And that top board went really well. I mean, I found an ally, and I was England, and Farengen was in France. We managed to kill Germany quickly. And then, everything went my way because on my side of the board, Russia was not really fighting anymore. I managed to get some accommodation with him, while Farren was fighting against Peter McNamara in Italy. And having him as a neighbor is always very, very, very tough mentally, strategically, tactically. And so at some point, I managed to get the upper hand, and that was it. And I was, very happy, and it kind of ended my pandemic era where I was playing a lot and I was very motivated. And since then, I've been, going back to my old ways, playing a few tournaments here and there, but not as much as during the pandemic. So that was a great way to end my pandemic era with a high note.
Yeah, and you made it sound so easy. Riaz, was yours easy? The 2022 championship, was yours easy? Walk us through yours.
Sure. I like the end result, but getting there was a real struggle. It was quite a challenge. My first two games, I was actually scratching and clawing just to get in draws. And I actually turned to my wife and I said, do I really want to play the third round? Do you guys want to just go out for dinner somewhere and just hang out? Because it's not going my way. And sure enough, I decided to play that third round. Got a good score, got into the final, and ran an AT that worked really well for me. Unfortunately for my ally, it didn't work out so well for them. But they carried me through to topping that board. And I remember that day very well. It was a very snowy day in Vancouver, and it was the first time I've shoveled snow with a smile on my face. So it was great.
Well, I'm glad we were able to put a little zip into your work. But you have won both extended deadline and face-to-face events as well as this VDC. Give the aspiring victors out there in the audience some tips on how tournament play strategy could differ, from playing a tournament versus playing pickup games or playing in leagues. I mean, how are tournaments different?
Sure. Tournaments are much different because every round is equally important and every round counts. You can't have a bad round and win a tournament. That's unless for somehow you solo. But other than that, for the most part, every round counts. Every point counts. You don't want to leave anything on the board and then have regrets later on. And it's also a lot more intense. It's there's no chill time. You're not kind of just you don't have really the time to reflect because you're playing another round shortly after the first one. And you really have to kind of get over things and disappointments and frustrations very, very quickly to move on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nikolai, you have a singular distinction, really, of having won the World Championship for both face-to-face and for virtual face-to-face. How were those two championships different? And which one of those did you think was more challenging?
It's really difficult to say because, my face-to-face championship I won when I was kind of young. It was my first WDC tournament. I was kind of unknown and I got a bit lucky. And I mean, I played well, but that was a bit the beginner's luck. So, I mean, I don't think I appreciated. I thought I would be winning many other tournaments, every tournament I would go to. So, while the VDC tournament, I think it was, I had realized at that point that winning tournaments, lots of things has to go your way. I mean, the year before, I ended up tying but losing on tie break. And so once I won that one, I was really, really satisfied because, it was really a tough tournament. I mean, these virtual tournaments are very intense and you don't have when things don't go your way, you don't have other people to get a beer with after the game to just relax and get your energy back. And so, when you play for the whole tournament and things don't go your way, it's easy to get down. While at that one, at least after a very, very long tournament, I ended up with a very positive feeling. So that was great.
So your advice for people playing virtual is have some friends around to commiserate with after it's over. Is that what you're saying? Just like we would at a face-to-face event?
Yeah, try to talk to your virtual friends online, chat with them, have a call after the game. Try to, even if things didn't go well and you don't really want to talk to them, talk with the other players at the board, because that's the way to evacuate some of the stress and the negative feelings, and also I've played a lot of face-to-face tournament, and that's one of the parts I like the most. Replaying the game after the game. It's a lot of fun. That's where you make friends, and even if things don't go well and you hate someone during the game, I think when you replay it afterwards with a beer, you joke around, and that's where you make the best friends, I think. So in virtual, it's more difficult, but so I would really recommend to people to try to talk with other players after the game is over.
Yeah, that makes sense. Morgante, there may be folks out here who are going to try the VDC coming up in the next couple of months. What is your best advice on how a player can get through the preliminary rounds and onto the top board?
Sure. The biggest thing that I see people doing is ending too early, not getting that extra point, right? Especially in the preliminary rounds. It's always worth it to get that extra point, right? You're rarely going to, ruin a relationship or not have a chance in the later round because you got that, but it does make a difference in the scoring system. And it's, really advantageous for you to run up the board when you can, run up the score. I think people very frequently make the mistake of saying, oh, it's a good enough result, but it could be better. And, if you're in an advantageous position, those don't come that often, right? I like Nicholas. I think in my first time I won a turn, I was like, oh yeah, this is easy. This is my first year playing. That's going to come frequently. I've now played a few more years since then, and yeah, wins are hard. It's hard to have a good board position and board alignment that's going to get you there. And when you have it, you need to run with it, right? Get those extra points, get what you can while the stars are in your favor, and that's hopefully enough to carry you through to the top board when it's going to be a different environment usually.
Well, what do you do with the counter argument that running up the score like that can make you a target in future rounds? I mean, does your advice work in every round or just towards the end of the preliminary rounds?
I think the truth is the points are the points, right? There's nothing where points are more advantageous in later rounds, right? So if you can get the good position early on and maybe people target you a bit more, they're not going to target you that aggressively that it's not worth the extra points early on, right? And the thing is, maybe you don't get such a big score in the next round. That doesn't matter if you had a big score in the early rounds. And people are still, if the difference is that you are winning your first board and you're topping your first board, people are still going to notice that, and they're still going to potentially go after you. So you might as well have the extra points to compensate for it.
Okay, good. Nicolas, give us some final thoughts for the audience about the Virtual Diplomacy Championship.
I mean, I think everybody should try it if they have the time, and because it's really a good way to get into the hobby, to get to know people, and to play with people from all over the world, and you really get this feeling that you're playing a silly board game, but there are lots of other people playing the same silly board games everywhere in the world, and sometimes you can just make friends, you get some contacts, and that's a lot of fun. And I think that's one of the best way for people who cannot travel or are a bit shy to try their luck and see if they like it. Because I think diplomacy, this competitive aspect of tournament play, it's not for everybody. But until you try, you don't know if you like it or not. And I think VDC is really a good place to start.
Yeah, I know for a fact there are people who have started in the virtual space and then gone to face-to-face tournaments and loved them. I mean, so it works both directions too. There are people that are longtime face-to-face players that really should try virtual as a great opportunity to, get those competitive juices flowing in between face-to-face tournaments that they, can maybe travel to or maybe can't. Morgante, how about you? Final thoughts for the audience?
Sure. I would say I would agree. You should try both, see what you like. My other advice is I don't know if there's any league games before the virtual tournament, but if there are, try to get in one. Right, it's a little bit lower stakes. It's a little bit good way to get your juices flowing versus your first chance playing being in a big major tournament. Right, that's certainly how I had enough comfort in the game in my first year of playing to end up winning that first year was from playing in their virtual diplomacy league beforehand.
There should be a game day for Virtual Diplomacy League in December before this VDC takes place. The VDC dates are still being finalized, but I think it is true that the December game day for VDL will be before that. And the November VDL will probably be going on while people are watching this episode. So it'll be too late for the November one, but certainly the December one. So I think that's good advice. Riaz, finish us off about the VDC and why folks should play in it.
Sure. You know what? It's miserable outside weather-wise. You're probably not going to be doing anything outside. You probably spent enough time with your family through the holiday season. Do something for yourself. Go out there, play a couple of rounds of diplomacy. Just have a really good time and take out Nicola because he's won too many tournaments. And the last thing I kind of just wanted to say was yesterday was November 11th and the 105-year anniversary of the end of World War I. And so really thank you to all the veterans all over the world and to everybody out there who's helping to keep our world safe.
That is a great comment. I was actually, I sang at a Veterans Day event yesterday. The guy that was the speaker said that we have now officially lost all World War I veterans. There are no World War I veterans still around in the world, which for somebody my age is quite a thing to hear. But there are still a couple of 100,000 veterans of World War II, at least in the United States and Canada. Thanks, job well done to all of our veterans of whatever country of which they fought. And thanks for you all coming on Deadline. And we look forward to a spectacular Virtual Diplomacy Championship, which I assume all three of you will be playing in once again. See y'all. Thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixicon.com. To review all of our broadcast offerings, visit our website at www.diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss, and, of course, Belgium.